Poplar lumber is plentiful, cheap, and usually pretty ugly. That's why this hardwood is typically reserved for projects that get painted. But it doesn't have to be painted though, because I'm going to show you how to make poplar look pretty. Hello DIYers, I'm Chris with ToolboxDIY, and today I'm going to show you how to remove that ugly green color from poplar. It's using something called oxalic acid. It's also referred to as a wood bleach. In reality, it only really bleaches poplar. For all other wood species, it's typically used to remove stains. But poplar is special. It's a little magic trick that I'm going to show you, because this acid will remove that green just like that. Well, rather than me explaining the process of how oxalic acid is going to impart different colors on different tones of poplar, let's just jump in on the process and I'll show you how it's done. Here I have various pieces of poplar that I'm using for tool holders that are going to hang on the rack that you may have seen behind me. So you can see here I've got a pretty good sample of various color tones. I've got some very pale, almost white color pieces here. I've got some pieces that have quite a bit of green in them and maybe a little bit of black. Here's another one. I've got a couple of very nice brown pieces. These don't have much green. I think they do here, but on the top not much at all. You could argue that there's a slight green tone to that. And then here we have a definite green tone, but it's still somewhat of a brown color. I think this one, yeah, it's a nice brown as well. So you can see we've kind of got a green, we've got a brown, and we've got a white. So we'll get to see how all of those change color when we apply the acid. Okay, first things first. You'll want to make sure that you've finished all of your cuts and final dimensioning of the pieces that you want to bleach. This is because oxalic acid has a fairly shallow penetration. So if you were to bleach a piece, and then say take a pass with a hand plane 2, 3, 4 times, you'll start to see the original color come back. Because of this shallow penetration, I like to do a lot of my finish sanding before I apply the oxalic acid. So for me, typically I would sand this to 220 grit before I apply a finish. But with oxalic acid, we're going to apply it and it's actually going to raise the grain. So what that means is you got a nice smooth surface, you apply the acid, it's dry, and then you feel it and it's a little rough, it's a little furry, so we have to sand it again. So to save some time, here's what I like to do. I start sanding at 80 grit if I need to, if I've got any tool marks I want to get rid of. Then I sand to 120 grit and then to 180 grit. And then I stop there, I apply the acid, I rinse it, I let the pieces dry, and then I do one final sanding at 220 grit. This way I'm not removing very much material and I don't have to sand through the same grit twice. Now once my pieces are sanded and they're ready to go, it's time to go outside, prep our area, and mix the acid solution. Now I already have a little bit left over from a previous batch, so I won't be demonstrating how to mix it, but I will explain what you need and how to do it safely. So I recommend a garden sprayer. The 1 gallon size is perfect for this job. Fill that with a gallon of warm water. Doesn't have to be hot, but it should be warm. You're also going to need your oxalic acid. I'm using Rainbow brand. It is 1 pound, and you put 1 pound into 1 gallon of water. You're also going to need safety glasses. It is acid. You don't want it in your eyes. Acid resistant gloves. And I recommend a particulate mask. Now this is really only needed when you mix it, because you will see that the oxalic acid comes in like a white crystalline form. So this stuff can get in the air, you can breathe it in. It is poisonous, so you do not want to breathe this in. And that's another reason we want to do this outside. So you have your warm water, 1 gallon. You pour the acid into the water. Do not put the acid in the container and then pour the water in. You want to do acid into water. And of course you've got all your safety gear on. Screw on the top, give it a good shake for about 10 or 15 seconds. And then prep your area. This stuff will kill vegetation It will also clean concrete. So unless you want to mix up a large batch and add some more work to your project, I recommend not doing this on a concrete or stone surface. So when you get your pieces lined up, give it another good shake and you're ready to go. So let's go outside and get this done. Okay, I've got all my pieces laid out and it's time to apply the acid solution. Apply it liberally, and for me, I want to apply it to every side of all of these pieces, so I'm hitting the sides as well. And after I do one side of these, I'm going to turn them over, and you'll notice here that I'm elevating them so they'll dry more quickly, and now I'm hitting the top side. Now, it doesn't take much and you'll start seeing the color of the wood change almost instantaneously. You'll apply one coat and then let that coat dry and then apply a second coat. Now, if you're crunched for time, you don't have to let the first coat completely dry. You could wait probably 45 minutes to an hour and that'll be adequate. After the second coat, I typically let the pieces dry to the touch. I don't actually touch it to test that, but if it looks dry to the touch, then that's good enough for me. Now the next step is very important. These pieces now have acid on them, and as I said before, that's poisonous and that's not good for us. So we want to rinse these liberally with water. So you can see here that I've got a garden hose and I'm going to just throw a lot of water at these things. Now you've got a choice to make at this point. You can just rinse it with water, or you can take a soft scrub brush and you can scrub it. I'm not going to scrub it, I'm just going to rinse it. But because of that, when I do my final sanding, I'm going to take some extra safety precautions that I'll explain later. And then after I'm done rinsing these pieces, I'll take them into my shop and I'll let them dry there for 48 hours before I do anything further. Okay, I now have fully dried, bleached pieces of poplar. These sat in the shop for 3 days. You don't need to wait 3 days. Usually 2 will do it, but due to my schedule, I had to wait 3. And as I mentioned before, the grain on these pieces will be raised since we sprayed these with an acid water solution. So now I have to give them one final sanding using 220 grit sandpaper. I'm using both a random orbital sander and a spindle sander to make the job a lot easier. Now notice, since I chose not to scrub these pieces during rinsing, I'm wearing a particulate mask while I'm doing that, so I do not inhale any acid particles. And then when I'm done sanding, I vacuum every piece to get all the residue off. Now another note, my shop vac has a 3-stage filter system on it. The last stage being a HEPA filter, so I make sure that I'm not recirculating any of this back into the air that I'm going to breathe. So let's see how these turned out. Now keep in mind this is still raw wood. No finish has been applied to these. You can see on the real light pieces that the oxalic acid really didn't have too much of an effect. It made it a little bit lighter. You'll see this piece, you can see the orange. This used to be green. And I want to point out that this here is actually not green, it's black. And that's worth noting, is that the oxalic acid will not remove the black streaks, and you can see some of that here. So all of my pieces that had a lot of green on them now have orange. Now these pieces had just a touch of green, and I think these turned out quite nice, and it'll look even better once we get some finish applied to them. Then we've got some pieces here that didn't have much green in them at all. You can see they're a nice brown. Now I know what you're thinking, the orange is ugly. Why would I want my wood to look like that? Well, that's a valid point and you probably wouldn't want to. So there's basically 2 ways to address this. When you go select your lumber, try to avoid the pieces that have that predominant green to them. Shoot for the boards that have either no green or have a uniform green tint throughout the whole board. You know, kind of like this. Has a green tint, but it turns into a very nice color after you apply the acid. The second option you have is, if you can't avoid the green and it does turn out orange, you can always try to stain the pieces a darker color to mask that orange. I would recommend getting a stain that does not have very much red in it, because I think the red mixed with the orange may cause that to be more predominant than you want it to be. Your other option is just to finish it with something clear. In fact, the rack here behind me was finished with something clear. All of this is made out of poplar, and it was also subject to the oxalic acid. So let's take a look at these pieces. So here's what you can expect once you get a finish applied. This has a oil varnish blend. It's got about 6 coats applied to this. And you can see here we've got some pieces that were rather light. They're a little more of a yellow now thanks to the oil finish. There are some black streaks that didn't go away. We've got a piece up here that had a decent amount of green and it turned orange. Now this piece here and this piece here had a lot of green. This was the greenest I've ever seen poplar, and you can see how orange it really is. Now I find the orange to be rather obnoxious on the raw wood, but after I apply a finish I think it's much more tolerable, so I don't really mind it. And for this rack I didn't care to use uniform pieces because part of this was to be able to demonstrate to you all what you can expect. I think my favorite piece out of this is this one here, and this was a nice brown with just a little bit of a green tint. In fact, let me show you the board that this came from. So this half of this board was used to make some of these pieces. You can see it's a brown color with a little bit of a green tint. For my taste, I think that's exactly what you want to shoot for, to get a very nice color after you apply the acid and then ultimately a finish. Okay, I want to leave you with one last piece of advice. If you choose to stain the pieces of poplar, I recommend using a stain or a wood conditioner. You don't need to go out and buy this. You can actually mix your own. It's very simple. Take 1 part of a oil-based polyurethane and mix that with 3 parts of mineral spirits. Apply that liberally to the pieces, let it sit for 5 or 10 minutes, and then wipe off the excess. Then let those dry overnight, and then attempt to apply your stain. That's really going to help with that blotchiness that you might find when you are staining poplar. Some parts of the wood absorb more of the finish than others. Well, that's all there is to it. I wish you luck on your next project, and if you choose poplar, now you know how to make it look pretty. I'm Chris with Toolbox DIY, and I'll see you next time.